Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard. Greetings, Bart.
Hello.
How's it going today, Bart?
It is going well.
Excellent. Friends, today we are welcoming Bart Everson to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're glad to have you. Let's get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to who you are as a person.
Well, sure. My name is Bart Everson. I'm a resident of New Orleans, Louisiana. And, I'm in my mid-50s. I've been living here since I like to tell people I've been here since the last century in New Orleans. Since I came here in 1999. But in reality, or in my younger days, my formative years, were spent in Indiana and 1 year in northern Sweden. And I've been a longtime member of the Green Party and organizer with the Green Party of Louisiana. And what else? I'm running for office.
Sounds good. So what made you decide to join with the Green Party?
Well, it always seemed like the party that was most aligned with my values going way back. When I was living in Indiana, there was no organized Green Party. But when I moved to Louisiana and it was about the time for a presidential election, I thought, well, maybe there's something here. This is when Ralph Nader was running for president. And he generated so much excitement because he had, national name recognition. And people were coming out of the woodwork to support his candidacy. And so I discovered that there was no organized political Green Party. There was a kind of a movement, but not an actual party here in Louisiana. But there were a lot of people and a lot of excitement around the idea of forming one. And so the expression that we used at the time was that it was like we were having to build the bicycle while we were riding it. And that's kind of what it felt like, kind of crazy. So there was a lot of energy and excitement around that. It took 5 years before we actually got official ballot status here in the state of Louisiana. And then, of course, that put us right when it was just a few weeks before Hurricane Katrina made landfall. And the city of New Orleans, of course, flooded because of the flawed system designed by the Army Corps of Engineers. Anyway, to make a long story short, that dealt a huge blow to organizing efforts here, and the Green Party has been kind of in recovery ever since.
All right, sounds good. So kindly tell our audience what office you're running for and how you decided to run for this office.
Well, sure. I'm running for city council at large. New Orleans has 5 city council districts and 2 at-large seats that represent, of course, the whole city. And specifically, I was, approached by a kind of loose, I guess you would say, an ad hoc committee of activists and concerned citizens who are kind of working for social justice and ecological wisdom. And they asked if I would run as a climate candidate. And this was something that really got my attention because I'm very concerned about the climate crisis. In fact, I'm a father. I have a teenage daughter. She doesn't plan to have kids. I'm sorry, my phone is making a noise. She doesn't plan to have kids, which is fine. I fully support her. I don't want her to have kids. She's too young right now. And I know plenty of people are childless by choice. That's a fine personal choice. I've got no problems with that, of course. But what concerns me is that a lot of young people are actually terrified of bringing another generation into this world because they've been paying attention to the news. They've been listening to the scientific reports about where we're headed on a planetary basis. And it is very grim if you connect the dots and actually just pay attention to what scientists are telling us, have been telling us for decades. And so that was, so I felt like this has got to be the most important issue. It should be part of like every policy decision that we're making at every level, including the city of New Orleans, which is, we got elections coming up here. So I decided to go into that race to try to address that issue, just to bring attention to the urgent need for action on the climate crisis.
So how do you plan to use your city council position to address the climate crisis in Louisiana?
That is a very good question, a very speculative question, because of course I haven't won yet, and the odds are indeed long. So I am trying to think about, how can I, as a candidate, get people thinking and talking about this? And of course that involves thinking about, well, what can the city council do? What should the city council be doing? And what should be the absolute top priorities that would make sense in light of what I've just been saying about the urgency of need of climate action? And for me, it comes down to really three very specific things. Number one is our energy situation. This is really kind of the biggest issue for most cities, I believe, in terms of sustainability. We have to, we know what's causing climate change. It's because we're putting stuff into the air, greenhouse gases, carbon into the air. And we need to stop doing that. So that's largely how we generate our energy, and our energy consumption then becomes a critical issue. Where do we get our energy and how much do we consume? And so in New Orleans, we have a really unique situation because there's only 2 cities in the whole country that have regulatory authority over their utilities. Usually it's done like, at the state level, state commissions and so forth. But New Orleans and Washington, D.C. have this regulatory authority as cities. So you would think, given that we'd be in a better situation with our provider, but we do have the actual utility for our power is actually a for-profit, shareholder-driven corporation, Entergy New Orleans. But the council has the authority to regulate it. So you'd think we'd be doing better, but we're not really doing that well. In fact, Entergy has just announced that they want to raise our rates about $25 a month, which is a lot. And holding Entergy accountable then is going to be a central theme of my campaign. And whoever wins this race needs to take that very, very seriously. The other 2 top priorities, I would say, are improving our infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure. We need to make it, certainly we need to do better by our pedestrians and our bicycle riders. I've been a bicycle commuter for over 2 decades. I know it's a great way to get around the city, but we could really do better to make it safe and easy to bike around the city. But where we really have the most opportunity, I think, and the most need is in public transit. And we need to have a system that is just the cleanest, most pleasant, easiest way to get around the city so that it becomes the very first thing you think about rather than the last option for a lot of people. And I think part of doing that is to make it free, make it so that fares are free, so that people can just jump on a ride in the public transit system, because we know that an electrified public transit system would be a much better way to get people around the city than driving in cars. And there was a third thing. I did say that there were 3 points. The third thing is actually kind of decarbonizing or greening the local economy, and that that's pretty complex and wide ranging. But basically, um, we need to invest and incentivize activities of our local economy that are not carbon intensive, that don't result in putting a lot of carbon into the atmosphere.
All right. So those are your 3 points for addressing the climate issue as it pertains to your environment in Louisiana, in
Yeah,
New York.
those are the top three. Of course, you could always say there's more, but it's good to have, I think, say like these are three things to focus on because it's easier to remember. And
Okay, sounds good. So if it's not top secret, what is your campaign strategy and or tactics?
well, the first thing I had to do was kind of define what is success for this campaign, and that is a tricky thing to talk about. I found because it turns out a lot of highly educated people still don't really understand how our political system works, and they're kind of naive or not very realistic, I would say. I'm going into this race with three other people for this seat, city council at large. It's an open seat. There's no incumbent. The other three people, though, all have prior experience in public service, right? They've held public office before, and they have more name recognition, certainly, than I do. And they all have substantial campaign funds. Two of them had over $250,000 in their campaign fund before the campaign even began. And now that we're officially into the campaign season, I don't even know how much they may have raised. So that's why I said that the odds are long. And given that, I think that it's just, I need to be realistic about what success really would look like. And I have tried to be clear with anybody who wants to get on my team or, help support this effort, this campaign. I've been clear that the definition of success is basically injecting this issue into the public discourse. If we can get people talking about it, if we can get it so that other candidates think this is an important priority as well, and voters are thinking, yes, something can and should be done about this, then that will be a successful campaign in my book. So the strategy all kind of flows from there, as you can imagine. We are trying to, raise some money and probably mostly spend a lot of that on advertising. But it's frankly at a much lower level than it needs to be, and that's just the reality of the situation. Though I'm kind of a grassroots candidate.
I'm going to pull a couple of things I heard you say and put them together.
Sure.
I
Sorry, I didn't hear anything since you said you're going to put two things together.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. At the top of the conversation, you're talking about how Ralph Nader influenced you, and I remember reading a biography about him. I believe it was Crusader, spoiler icon, which talked about how he used his travels to Scandinavia to inform and influence his politics. So did your stay in Sweden influence your political views in any way?
Well, yes, it sure did. I was only there for a year, but it was a formative year. I was 18. I turned 19 when I was living there. And I saw a couple of things three things really that really made a huge impression on me. Number one is that they had a lot of political parties, like 5 political parties at least, that were pretty significant, and probably a lot more that were smaller. So there was a range of, kind of views and perspectives that were represented in the political discourse. The second thing, of course, is that when I had an injury, I had an ingrown toenail, and I had to go and get it treated. And I had medical treatment, and it wasn't the most serious thing in the world, but it was substantial. And when it was all done, and I inquired about payment, they just laughed, because they have a single payer medical system there where it's just considered part of like a human right. You just get medical treatment. We take care of you. And it was like, well, that made so much sense to me. I've been convinced ever since that that's what we need to do in the United States. But the third thing was when there was a strike. I won't get into all the convoluted politics of this, but there was a series of strikes that led to the students going on strike. I was a student. And I was living in a very small town up by the Arctic Circle. Even in this small town, the students went on strike. Across the whole country, they went on strike. And they took to the streets and they marched and protested and had a meeting with the local authorities to discuss their concerns. And I'd never seen anything like that living in the United States. And it became clear to me that in Sweden, they were willing to go on strike and go protest pretty much, not, I wouldn't say at the drop of the hat, but when they had a serious concern. They were willing to do that. It was just a part of their culture. And when I came back to the United States, it just seemed like, by contrast, growing up, now things have shifted over the years, but as I mentioned, I'm in my mid-50s, so I came back to the United States in the 1980s, and my experience kind of begins there. It just seemed to me that the American people are far too complacent and we're far too willing to just let bad things happen. To some extent, well, I can't fully account for it, but I do feel like we need to be a little bit more ready to throw down, to go to the mat for the things that we believe in, for the values that we have. Frederick Douglass said once that power concedes nothing without a demand. We have to make the demand. We have to press the demand for what we want. Otherwise, we'll never get it.
So since you mentioned people who are wanting to be on your team, I would like to ask you, how do you plan on motivating your team?
That is an excellent question. I had not thought about that, because so far everybody on the team has been people who are kind of, I guess you would say, intrinsically motivated. I went first to the local Green Party, and they had just kind of gotten back together, kind of reformed, and they've just been enthusiastic. They want to help, and they want the experience of working on a campaign, because that's part and parcel of political parties. And a few other people who've contacted me, they're the people who kind of pushed me to run in the first place. They have experience, and my campaign coordinator, in fact, she ran for office herself a couple of years ago, so she's been with me at every step of the way. So far, anyway, everybody who has been involved in this team have been people who seem to already be motivated.
So for our listeners out there, whether they're in New Orleans or they're elsewhere, how can they support your campaign?
Well, thank you for asking, because I would welcome that support. The best way is to go to my website, which is just my name, Bart Everson. It's barteverson.com. And, maybe I should spell it out. It's B-A-R-T, like Bart Simpson, right? But it's Everson instead of Simpson, E-V-E-R-S-O-N. BartEverson.com is the website. And there, people can, of course, sign up for a campaign newsletter. It'd be the best way, really, of staying abreast of what's going on, like the late-breaking news and so forth. And there's also, some policy prescriptions that we're in the process of posting there. We've got like 2 policy statements so far and hoping to add more. So people can check out and see if they really, if this is a campaign that they are interested in and want to support. Of course, it's centered on the climate crisis. And they can make a donation. That is very welcome as well, because any money that we receive will be used to kind of amplify the message of the need for action on the climate crisis.
Okay, we can direct people to go there. That's great. Bart, thank you for coming on the podcast today and sharing your views and talking about your campaign. We wish you all the best in your campaign and in your future endeavors.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a fascinating series that you've constructed here, and so I wish you many fascinating interviews in the future.
Thank you, sir. Have yourself a wonderful day and all the best to you.
Take care. Be well.